Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I am so honored to have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Marcia Reynolds. Marcia is an internationally renowned master certified coach. In fact, she was recently rated as one of the top 4 coach thought leaders in the world. And her expertise is in helping coaches and leaders to make every conversation a different making experience. And I imagine, Marcia, many of our listeners are very curious to understand what that means. And I imagine we'll dive into that today. Just very quickly, I'd like to share a little bit, Marcia, about your background. In addition to coaching leaders and professionals in multinational companies and hospital organizations, Marcia has provided coaching and coach training in 43 countries. She speaks at conferences around the world, including being a 2-time TEDx speaker. And I highly recommend that you check out both of these because they're both excellent. Marcia holds a doctorate in organizational psychology and 2 master's degrees in learning psychology and communications. She was the 5th global president of the International Coach Federation and recently was inducted into the ICF's Circle of Distinction for her contributions to the global coaching community. Congratulations, Marcia.
Thank you.
I also want to mention that you are the author of several books, some of which I've read. And both the ones that I've read so far are Outsmart Your Brain and The Discomfort Zone, both excellent. You're also the author of Wonder Woman and your latest bestseller, Coach the Person, Not the Problem. I recently had the privilege to attend Marcia's outstanding WBEX Breakthrough Coaching Program. And I also got to know Marcia a couple of years ago here in Phoenix when I attended her Path to Coaching Mastery program. Thank you again, Marcia, for being with us today. We are absolutely delighted to have you share your expertise with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
So how about we kick it off with you sharing a little bit about your background in terms of how you got into this line of work?
You know, I, like many people, have had an accidental career, and I found out when I was doing my doctoral research that many of us, our careers were not with the first intention. And so my first master's was actually broadcasting. And I ended up pushing television sets around for a psychiatric hospital. But it was for the training department. And then my boss decided to go get her doctorate, and she dumped the whole training department in my lap. And my first assignment was management training. And it's really why I went to get a second master's, because I wanted to learn how to design training, since that's what I was supposed to be doing. And I didn't know what I was doing. So other than reading the instructions and holding conversations, but I even then recognized how much we learn in dialogue, not necessarily being told what to do or what's right, but having the conversations that make us think things through and see things differently, that even then I recognize the power of that. So I got my second master's in adult learning and instructional design, and it just triggered my curiosity into how do people really learn? I mean, I learned things and I tried to apply them in my training programs, because from the hospital, I went into high tech. I started running training departments, and people loved my training and they always gave me the happy faces. But then as soon as things got a little awkward, they'd go back to old behavior. So I kept researching and going to workshops and making my training better, or I thought. And it wasn't until I found coaching that I said, okay, training is just an event. It can only inspire people to try. But when you coach people and you're with them by their side as they run through life and jump over cliffs, that you're there with them to look at what's awkward, what's confusing, what's scary, and walk through the fire with them, that it makes a difference. They commit them to the behavioral change. They will actually become someone different. And oftentimes my coaching is around identity. Who are you in this situation? And so I got very passionate. It's what drove me into wanting even to get my doctorate, because I wanted to understand, so what really goes on in the brain, and the learning that happens from coaching. See, I see coaching as a learning technology. And so I wanted to be able to know the science behind it, because that's who I am. And so it was kind of just this progression, of starting and ending up in training and wanting to do it better, that I landed in the coaching world and found the magic of coaching. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for sharing that background. And I loved how you kind of introduced it as an accidental career, because certainly many of the guests that we've had on this show, my own experience is that it kind of tends to be that way. And we just kind of need to trust that guidance, what feels right. And one of the things that have come up in this podcast is about not only our own mindset in terms of our own belief systems, our own identity, as you said, who we are, that shapes how we feel, and of course, how we behave, and ultimately our results, but also how do we support others, whether we are a leader in an organization and we want to help influence our team to adapt their behavior to some change, or maybe we are a parent and we want to influence our children, or perhaps we are a teacher and we want to influence our teachers, right? Any form of a leader, so to speak. And so one of the things that I'm really curious to know from your expertise is, what have you learned about how to really help change people's behavior, especially when they're feeling stuck or they're resistant to the change?
Well, that's what I love about coaching, is that, telling people what to do is pretty much a waste of time. Because, we're all so busy and we have so many things going on in our brain. And when we tell people what to do, we're only using, cognitive part of the brain, which is short-term memory, which means we have to recall what you told me. And every time I recall it, I change it. And then I don't end up doing what you think I should be doing anyway. So it's not very effective to tell people what to do. When I learned again how coaching really works, I recognize it works in a different part of the brain. And it's the creative process. It's the stopping to look at how I see things and see myself. And is there another way of looking at this, that I start seeing other possibilities? So, and we can't do this on our own. It's like I can't really take out my thoughts and look at them on my own, but you can help me do that. In fact, it's why I wrote Coach the Person, Not the Problem, because I recognize too many people thought coaching was asking questions. And how many leaders would say to me, well, I just don't have time to sit down and probe. And I'm like, it's an interesting view you have of coaching. It's not what I do. So first off, the better you get at it, the shorter it takes. But it's not just asking questions. So much of coaching is just reflecting. So I hear you saying this, and you said this was important, but you mentioned before that there was these other things that were, just as important and getting in the way. So how are they conflicting and how are they supporting? Something like that. Just asking that makes people stop and think about their thinking, to look at, how they've got different conflicts going on in their day, to see the gaps in their logic and the old beliefs that they're clinging to, and all these crazy things we're making up about the future when we have no idea. If anything, the pandemic taught us that there's no way we can predict the future. So why bother? So when I discovered that, I recognized that the best way that we can learn and change is when somebody helps us look at our thinking, to explore how I think, and which then allows me to see beyond the frames that I'm holding today. They say see outside of the box, but you can't see outside of the box unless you see the box in the first place. It's the same thing with the stories we live by daily. I can't see outside of my own stories until I see the story. So I, as a coach, as a leader, as a friend, if I can just help you see the stories that you're living by and you're holding, you will then see what other ways of looking at your situation and yourself on your own. But you can't take the stories out of your head. That I do that for you. And then we explore them together. That is just the amazing power of coaching that makes it different than consulting and mentoring and telling and managing, that we help people think more broadly for themselves, which allows them to see what else is possible. And that's, what one of the best gifts we can give each other. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. I think it's just beautiful what you've kind of shared with us today about how we truly learn and how we truly are motivated to adapt our behavior. And I think we've all intuitively experienced, that when someone tells us what to do, or we go to a workshop and maybe we're inspired for a few days, but then we kind of go back to the old ways of doing things. And for those people that are not yet as familiar with coaching or the coaching mindset, would you be willing to share a little bit about what that means? I think some people, when they think of coaching, they think of sports coaches. Or what do you mean by coaching?
Yeah. Well, it truly is what's called a reflective inquiry process. And so, again, instead of, most of the time when we're dealing with other people, like in the workplace, they're smart people. They know what to do, but something's getting in the way. Years and years ago, Ken Blanchard came out with his situational leadership model. And he always said, you need to determine, is it really knowledge and skills they need, or is it confidence and motivation? And most of the time, when we're dealing with our colleagues in the workplace, it's about confidence and motivation. It's about the fog of confusion that's going on right now. It's more about how we think, not what to think. So oftentimes leaders spend a lot of their day telling people what to do who already know that. They already know that. That was one of the most irritating things to me when I worked for people, was like, do you not think I know that? So it's kind of a waste of time. So coaching, when I'm in a coaching conversation with you, I'm going to ask you, what's the challenge you're facing right now? And I'm going to listen to your story. You're going to tell me the story you have around your challenge. And I'm not saying story not real. It's just that's how we see things. That's the reality we're creating and, we're identifying. So if you tell me how you see a situation, and I just share back with you what I hear you say, and any key elements, that you stress, that you have an emotion behind your words, and then I share that with you. I ask you questions to clarify what you mean by what you're saying, which automatically makes you start thinking, what is it that I mean by that? So, I help you first to clarify how you see your story, but then I want to understand, what is it you want to have happen instead of what's happening now? And even that can be very confusing to people. They don't really know what they want. They know what's wrong, but they don't know what they want. So we have to spend some time looking at that. And then the big question is, what's truly getting in the way of you, smart person, from solving this problem on your own? I don't have to tell you how to solve the problem. I want to discover what's stopping you from solving it, because I know you're smart. And if we can discover that together, it opens up what you will then do. And you're fully then committed to taking the action because you discovered it yourself. This process does not have to take an hour or a half hour. It can, my coaching usually 15, 20 minutes. And we get to a point where they go, well, of course. And oftentimes it's just a difficulty that we're facing. So whenever I teach leaders coaching skills, I always do a demonstration. And I ask for a volunteer, right? And it's almost always the same situation. I'm like, so what's the challenge you're facing? And they'll say, oh, I have to have a difficult conversation. And I don't really want to have it. They're going to get emotional. It's going to be bad. Okay, so here's the assumption. Already they're making assumptions it's going to be bad. And it's going to be emotional. It's going to be awful. And so they're just kind of like making this up. And so, we explore the situation. And usually it comes down to they've not been wanting to face either that the person is no longer in the right position, or maybe they made a wrong decision in the first place. So I was coaching this one leader, and he was going to have a difficult conversation. He had to demote this person. And he was saying, she's going to get so mad, she's probably going to quit. And then all of a sudden he looked away and said, I thought she'd be the one. But it's going to be so terrible. I said, tell me what just went on there. You seem sad. You said something very quietly. He said, not sad, I'm embarrassed. I think I promoted her too soon. And I'm like, okay, so how does that change your conversation with her? And all of a sudden it shifted. He knew he had to tell her that. And he wasn't going to in the first place, So just by giving people a safe space to talk through their challenge and to start to pull out the pieces to help them look at that it will change their perspective and change their actions going forward. This is powerful stuff. And to me, this is leadership. This is leadership, not telling people what to do, but helping them think more broadly for themselves.
And I love the examples that you're sharing and the tips that you've already shared with us today, because they're so practical. And yes, there is some strategy to it in terms of the questions, as you said, but it's more than that. It's a presence. It's heart focused, right? Really observing and being curious and noticing what's the experience, as you said, when you notice that, for example, with this gentleman, that embarrassment came up. That was something obviously kind of very deep for him, and just kind of created that opening. Mm-hmm. So for those people who don't yet have coaching experience and they're not sure what is the right thing to say, mm-hmm. What, if anything, can you suggest to kind of help people just, maybe see things differently, or, mm-hmm. just to maybe notice what their internal experience actually is in case they're numb to it?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing you just said was they don't know what to say. And that's the problem, because mm-hmm. it's not really about what you say, it's how you listen. Leaders often say to me, well, I try to have these conversations, but they never open up to me. And I always say, how are you listening? How are you listening? It's not what you say, it's how you hold the space to where they feel comfortable with you. They feel safe enough to be vulnerable and share. So I always say, just be still, ask them what's on, if there's something they're struggling with, say, so tell me how you see this challenge. What do you think is, what has come up that's difficult for you? And then just let them talk. Let them talk. So I always say, receive what they're saying. They're not wrong. This is just where they are right now. Just receive their words, their experience, and appreciate this is where they are. This is where they are. And then summarize back what you hear. Just, okay, so what you're telling me is this, and, just condense it, summarize it so the person feels heard. Because once they feel heard, they're going to feel seen and valued as well, which again helps them to feel safe to be with you. So summarize it and then just ask some clarifying questions. So when you said that, you think people are really going to be resistant to the change, what does resistant mean to you? What does that look like? What is it you think that they need, that they're afraid they won't get? So just ask some curious questions. Summarize what you hear and ask some curious questions. It's not interrogation. If you use summary, and share the points that seem to be most important to you, and get the conversation going that way. It's amazing when you do that and you help people to think in a very safe space. What's going to occur as they start to process the information on their own? Because again, we don't do a good job of that by ourselves, but it's what the neuroscientists call an external disruptor. When I disrupt your thinking by just sharing what I heard you say, and then asking you questions, then you start to stop and think, wow, I am thinking that way. I do see that. Well, that's not really what I see. There's other possibilities. And you start opening up your thoughts on your own just by you sharing, summarizing, and asking questions. So start there. So when I teach just like a day or two to leaders, we just practice that, just listening, summarizing, sharing back, being curious. And it's amazing the results that they get just with that.
Well, I absolutely believe it, because, I think when we're just curious and just being, as you said, kind of putting aside the agenda of what is the right thing to say and maybe past judgments, I think something very powerful happens, almost magical. And people, as you said, really feel heard, sometimes for the first time.
Yeah.
And it really is a very special gift to give to somebody. And what would you say then to individuals that right now are thinking, okay, this sounds amazing, but what if I, myself, am really angry with this person, or, this person has, done this thing to me in the past, and, what if they're coming in with their own stuff? What can they do to be more present when it's just hard?
It is hard, but that's the first step, what you just said, to be aware. I'm upset with this person. I'm disappointed. I'm irritated. And you have two choices. One, can you shift? Can you remember that the person is on their own journey and they're doing the best they can? And maybe if I listen to them, today will be the day. Can you shift into hope? And if you can't, then don't try to hide it. So if you might start the conversation with, I really want to explore with you what else you can do, to get the goals met. But I have to tell you, I am a little disappointed because you've made some promises you haven't met. And I truly want to believe that we can get beyond this. So would you be willing to have this conversation with me to see what else is possible for you? So just admit it, just say it, instead of trying to hide it, because they're going to feel the energy of your disappointment or your irritation anyway. And that you're hiding it is going to make it worse.
This is so powerful. I'm thinking even just as a parent, to be able to kind of be with our children, or, the people in our life, in this honest yet very loving way, because it really is about growth in the relationship, growth for the individual, growth for ourselves. Yeah. And what about when there's a lot of change happening in the company, or let's say in whatever arena we're talking about? I mean, some of the organizations that I work with, there's change after change, there's rapid growth, sometimes other things going on, and people have been through a lot of stuff. And there is a history where, maybe things didn't go through, maybe they didn't get the support they were told they would in the past, and they didn't. So they're kind of going in with that. And there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, and sometimes even anger, right? Going into a change. Yeah. What can a leader do to help their team manage some of the emotions?
Yeah. Well, one of the last things you said about, they may even be a little angry. I have some colleagues that wrote a book years ago. They've recently updated it called Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace. And people often feel betrayed, because they were promised this and they thought this was going to happen. And now everything's changed. One of the greatest things in that first job of working in a psychiatric hospital, that watching how they dealt with change, what they did, every department, whether it was, the psychiatric nurses or the facilities guys that were fixing things, they would get the whole department together whenever they'd have a layoff or, organizational change. And everyone would sit in a circle, and the manager just would allow each person to say, so what's on your mind? What are you feeling? And like one person would be like angry. It's like they said they weren't going to do this, and then they did it again. Another person could be sad because their friend was laid off. Another one scared about what's going to happen tomorrow. But the manager didn't try to fix it. They just said, yes, I understand. They would appreciate the experience the person had. And they'd go around the circle and just say this. And at the end, the manager would always ask, so what is it you need now in order to move forward? Do you need a couple of days? What is it you need? And almost every time I observed this, they would say, no, we're okay now. They just needed a safe space to say what was on their mind, what hurt, and not be judged, not try to be fixed, just to be able to say it and be okay. I've never seen a manager do that since then and do it so well. Although I often teach, just say to people, I care about what you think right now and what you're going through. Just share with me what your experience is. And again, don't jump in and try to fix it or make it better. Just understand. Give them a safe space to talk it through. That's the main thing. I'm scared about this change. I had this one class I was teaching. I was doing a follow-up, and she was moving her team into a new building. In the old building, they had it to themselves. It was, kind of an open space. They knew each other. They supported each other. And now they were moving into the new building with everyone else. And the space was different. And they were complaining to her about the parking spaces. She says, what's wrong with them, the parking spaces? And I said, do you really think that's it? And we started to explore, what is it that you think they may be afraid of losing? And there were so many things that was possible, right? They may be afraid of losing their closeness with their group, of not being able to get their work done in the same way in this new environment, of having to deal with other people. There were so many things. And I said, so how will you know? And she says, well, I guess I have to ask them. And she came back and said, of course, it wasn't the parking spaces, but that's the only way they were able to articulate their fear. Yeah.
It's so fascinating, once again, how simple it can be and how our head can get in the way, but what do I need to say? How do I respond if somebody bursts into tears, or if someone, is really afraid and I don't have the solution? How can I fix it? And what you're essentially saying here is the permission to just be there, to just listen without needing to fix it.
Right. It's not what you do, it's who you be in the moment with these people. Yeah. And go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say one of my favorite quotes is from John F. Kennedy, who said, after the dust of the centuries have passed over our cities, we too will be remembered not for our victories and defeats. And I always say, not for our KPIs and goals, but for our contribution to the human spirit. And again, to remember, what are we doing here together, really? And often when I coach leaders, that's the first question I ask them is, give me your definition of leadership. How do you see it? How do you think the people around you see their leaders or want their leaders to be? And that's far more powerful for us to look at the various definitions of leadership in the environment than it is looking at what's right, what's wrong. So like what you just said, they don't know what to say. They don't know what to say because they have this thing in their head that says a leader needs to be on top of everything and fix everything and be the expert, when that's not what they want from their leader. They just want some empathy, some compassion, and just a safe space. And if they cry, they're probably going to be embarrassed anyway. So can you just breathe and hold a safe space and let them process it without judgment? How powerful that is. Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that to do it in such an authentic and truly powerful way, we as leaders need to tune in and observe what our own inner experience is, even in preparation for a difficult conversation.
Absolutely.
And what guidance, if any, can you share with us about how to do that, how to kind of align? I know in the past you've talked about aligning the three brains or doing something to help us show up at our best.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I just published a blog post this morning on courageous presence. And I said, when you're facing a difficult conversation, it's not about making your fear go away because it's there. It's about saying, hello, fear. Fear is just an indication something could happen that I'm not going to like. That's all it is. So if we say, okay, I have this fear, but what is it that I can feel to override my fear? And courage. It's courage that we often need to have. And so I was talking in the blog post, I started with it was about 20 years ago. I was at a conference, the first International Coaching Federation European conference in Switzerland. And there was a sign about jumping off an Alp, parasailing off an Alp. And I'm like, well, why not? I like going up to mountains. So we went to the very top of one of the highest Alps, and I had no idea what was going to happen. So, he laid out the parachute and, it was a tandem. He was going to be behind me, but then he said, run. And it's like I had to run to the cliff and actually jump over this cliff on this really high Alp, and just trust that he and the parachute were going to come with me. Well, I'll tell you something. I'll never forget it. It taught me so much because my brain was screaming, stop, 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 you idiot. You're running toward a cliff. And I'll never forget saying, I hear you, brain, and I'm going to keep running for this cliff because this is awesome. This is awesome. And so I used my own emotions of courage and wonder to just keep going and going over that cliff and having the parachute pick me up. And there was a quote I put in my blog post that says, what if the opposite of ignorance isn't knowledge, but what if it's wonder? Having a sense of wonder about the world, the curiosity, and what I can learn if I just say, I don't know what's going to happen. It's scary, but you know what? Let's just go for it. See what happens. So we have to set ourselves an intention. I call it an emotional intention before any conversation. And I'm sure you read that in the discomfort zone, that to check in, what am I feeling right now? Am I disappointed? Am I angry? Am I afraid? And then choose one or two other emotions you want to feel. And again, I used to say instead. It's not instead. It's along with. So I am afraid and I feel courage. I feel care. I feel patience. So I choose one or two other emotions to breathe in, not just think about, but to breathe in So when I walk into the room, because the impact you have on people is the moment you walk into the room. I always say to leaders, so what happens when you walk into the room? Do you have any idea? Because your presence you carry with you the moment you put your hand on the door handle. So can you set your emotional intention so you can carry that energy with you before you even sit down and talk to them? Mm-hmm.
Oh, so powerful. And it's reminding me how in the book, one of the tools that you share is a feelings inventory and a tracking sheet. And I don't know if you remember, Marcia, but years ago, you gave me permission to use that, of course, crediting you with clients. And so now when I work with a coaching client, I always have them for 3 weeks, track what are they doing? How are they feeling?
That's great. Yeah. That was an outsmart your brain.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I've mixed up.
Yeah. Okay, I probably referenced it in the other ones too. So, yeah.
And it has been such a powerful tool, and I've used it myself, because just noticing what the experience is. And as you write in there, noticing some patterns within about 3 weeks, we start to notice our triggers. We start to become more familiar with our own operating system and what gets us to feel certain things and think certain things. And then we can choose to set an intention and shift into those heart intentions, whether we're going into a conversation or just moving along, our day or life, who we want to be, our identity, what is the special gift that we want to leave in this world, as you said, kind of very big picture. What are we here for, right?
Yeah,
what is leadership?
right.
What does humanity, being a human being, mean to us? And so, Marcia, thank you. I'm so deeply grateful for your expertise, for your love, for all that you do for our coaching community and our world. I truly believe that you are one of the greatest thought leaders in our world. And I wish for more people to learn from you and engage with you. Would you be willing to share with our listeners how they can engage with you, work with you, and so on?
Yes, thank you. Well, my website is covisioning.com, one word, Covisioning. There's lots of things, resources on there, including that emotional inventory. If you do a search, you can find it there, and many other things. And there's a contact. But I'm also at Marcia, Marcia, at covisioning.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm all over the place. YouTube. I was looking the other day, I have thousands of people sign up for my little videos on YouTube. I'm like, really? So, yeah.
I do believe, really, because I've seen many of them. And I mean, certainly over the years, many coaching demonstrations I've seen you give live to our local Phoenix chapter of the International Coach Federation, and of course through other programs. And your TED Talks, the talk at Google that you and I briefly spoke about before we launched the episode today, and many other things. And you're truly a teacher, and there is so much, not just for people who are leaders, officially with the title in an organization, but just leaders of life, leaders for themselves. And so, thank you once again.
Oh, you're so welcome. This is a good conversation. I appreciate it.